Doctor's ASMR. Thanks for being here. This is today's story time. Very interesting material. Acknowledging the good that's already in your life is the foundation of all abundance. Acknowledging the good that's already in your life is the foundation of all abundance. Before I get started, you know me. Always want a little something to snack on. These are the Chick-fil-A waffle fries. These are good. Nothing is sponsored. Not yet. I wish this video was sponsored. I really do. But it's all my time, baby. I'm gonna take my vitamins. I'm gonna start with my chlorophyll from Swanson. This is the sweet iced tea. It's real brewed iced tea. I can tell. Oh, this is collagen. That's a big pill. This is one of those paper straws. I feel like I'm starting to taste it. I don't know, maybe that was something else. I thought I tasted the straw. I tell you, Chick-fil-A has won the iced tea game. The Truth About Men, Sex, and Pleasure. This is written by Bernie Zilbergeld, Ph.D. Let's see where we left off. New solutions to sexual problems. For those with sex problems, a wider array of effective treatments is now available than at any previous time in history. The sex therapy introduced by behavior therapists and Masters and Johnson in the 1960s and early 70s has proved its worth. And there are also new and beneficial mechanical and medical methods. One way or another, there's hope for almost everyone with a sexual problem. The last section of this book is devoted to suggestions and exercises for overcoming the most common male sex problems, and much of the rest of the book offers advice for improving sex. Some of the material on resolving sex problems was covered in Male Sexuality, but it has been updated and new material and suggestions are offered. Alright, we're still on the introduction. I'm going to continue to read the introduction. Among the new items in this book, 2 chapters on what has become the most common and vexing sex problem for couples, differences in sexual desire. A chapter on getting our minds, easily our most powerful sex organ, on our sides, using methods developed by athletic trainers and world-class athletes as well as therapists. Suggestions for increasing sexual arousal, the power that fuels sexual functioning and joy. New material on the medical side of sex problems and new medical treatments. This book is based on many of the themes and much of the material in my Male Sexuality, but it is by no means just an update. I think I'm going to skip the introduction. Taking greater control of our lives. Although men often give the impression of being in control of their lives, that's the impression men are supposed to convey. And although women often believe this impression and envy it, I have been amazed over the years by how many men feel exactly the opposite. In bed and out, they feel buffeted like leaves in a strong wind. They often aren't getting what they want. They often feel powerless to affect the course of their work, their relationships, and even what happens in sex. One cause of sadness for me in the last 2 decades is that the great debates about taking charge of one's life have been conducted almost entirely by and for women. They're the ones who've been working to redefine traditional concepts of gender and sexuality itself. I'm not sad about what women are doing, I think it's great, but about the fact that more men haven't been doing the same. It goes against our grain. We're too busy performing to take time to think about such issues. These issues involve how we feel about things, something we have always been warned to stay away from, and we don't want to be whiners and complainers. We don't want to admit problems we don't have ready answers for. Nonetheless, we men have a lot to gain from taking greater control over our lives. We don't have to be at the mercy of our genitals or hormones or the sex role scripting we were brought up on. We don't have to forego the incredible joys and benefits of parenting and truly loving relationships. We don't have to put up with boring, joyless, or dysfunctional sex. We can develop personal styles, relationships, and sexual patterns that more closely fit our own values, preferences, and interests, that more closely fit our human selves. Chapter 1. I was just skipping the rest of the intro, that's all. The making of anxious performers. I hear girls had it rougher, but you couldn't prove it by me. Growing up was the pits. Incredible pressures all the time, everywhere. Had to do well in school, had to do well in sports, had to maintain my manly image and couldn't walk away from a fight. And later had to do well with girls and pretend I knew all about sex and was getting it regularly. I often wish the whole world would just go away and leave me alone. I don't know what I would have done, but it couldn't have been any worse. Man, 36. It took me half a century to realize that I'd been living a half-life, that I had buried important feelings and parts of myself. I was a shit father and husband. Not abusive or anything like that, but I wasn't even home most of the time. Aside from money and fixing things around the house, I didn't contribute anything. Only when my grandson arrived did I make a shift. With him, I am a whole person. I can love him, cuddle him, listen to him, and really talk to him. Sounds funny, listening and talking to a 4-year-old, but it's true. His expression of emotion has allowed me to unblock my own feelings. I'm sad that my wife died before I could be a real partner to her. I'm sad that I didn't give more to my own children and that I missed out on so much. Man, 54. That makes me sad just reading it. Making the man. Men in our culture walk a thin line. Like their fathers and grandfathers, they must be sure their behavior conforms to what is considered manly. It takes very little, maybe as little as one failure or one sign of weakness, to lose one's place in the charmed circle of men and to be called lady, woman, or pussy, all signifying a non-man or less than a man. But if a man isn't a man, then what is he? The answer most men seem to believe is nothing at all, for their identities are inextricably linked to their gender role. The concern of being considered a non-man keeps men in a state of almost perpetual vigilance and anxiety. It also makes for a certain inflexibility. If the results of changing one's behavior can be so dire as a loss of identity, one doesn't take change lightly. There's nothing new about this situation for men. It has existed in Western societies for hundreds of years. What is new is that the traditional definition of masculinity has come under scrutiny and attack, and that the messages men yet have become quite confused. Men are still supposed to exhibit all the manly virtues, but now they should also be sensitive and emotionally expressive, attributes that used to be considered feminine. Being a man has become more difficult than ever before. What follows is, in my mind, not a pretty story. It shows how we transform male babies into adult beings who are somewhat less than human, who are cut off from huge portions of themselves, the parts that have to do with caring, nurturing, and expressing, who must wear a suit of armor almost all day and night, and who, in a very real sense, are only pale reflections of who they might be. At least in the old days, they were heavily rewarded for succeeding at being who society wanted them to be. But in recent times, men have come under unrelenting criticism for being who they were trained to be and for not being who they were discouraged from being. The cry is heard on media talk shows, in countless books and articles, in therapy offices, and in bedrooms and kitchens throughout the land. Why aren't men more interested in relationships? Why aren't they softer? Why don't they express feelings? Why aren't they more interested in household chores and child care? The questions are, of course, not really a question, but accusations. But why should men be these ways? Where did they learn to focus on relationships, to express emotions, to be interested in children? The answer is nowhere at all. By the age of 3 or so, boys and girls are aware that they are not just children, they are boy children or girl children. And these distinctions are extremely important. Later learning is always filtered through their gender-colored lenses. Even such neutral-seeming activities as cooking, soccer, and math are influenced by these lenses. Very early on, the child has a notion that soccer and math are things boys are interested in, while cooking is for girls. These notions are easily modifiable at early ages. A boy whose father takes pride in his culinary skills may well conclude that cooking is for males. But the point remains that everything is seen in terms of gender. This is especially true for areas such as sexuality, which is always and everywhere seen in gender-linked ways. In every culture, the rules for male and female sexual behavior are different. What a culture teaches its boys and girls is dependent on its images of men and women, what it wants these youngsters to grow up to be. Although in recent years, we have been reevaluating what we want from men and women, the traditional definitions still exert a very strong pull. A number of researchers have found that a small number of characteristics comprise most of what we expect from our men. Strength and self-reliance, success, no sissy stuff. In other words, don't be like women. And sexual interest and prowess. Here's a description from a Harold Robbins novel. This was a strong man. The earth moved before him when he walked. Men loved and feared him. Women trembled at the power in his loins. People sought his favors. That may seem a bit outdated, but here's how a recent Sidney Sheldon novel describes the hero. He was like a force of nature, taking over everything in his path. In a 1989 novel titled Sophisticated Lady, we read of the hero who had, of course, a tall, powerfully built body. Just standing there, he radiated a quiet kind of strength and authority. And it goes without saying that he was a very successful businessman. He's the modern version, less raucous, more sophisticated, but still strong and successful. Over and over, the descriptions of admired men in books and movies convey, implicitly or explicitly, strength, power, and independence. Of course, there are contrary images: weak men, passive men, and general bunglers like Dagwood Bumstead. But we know they aren't what's wanted, that their bungling is precisely what makes them funny. Real men don't behave like this. Little boys and little girls are certainly not the same. Boys, for example, are on the average more active and aggressive, but they are more similar than adult men and women. Boys, like girls, are playful, warm, open, expressive, loving, vulnerable, and all the other things that make children so attractive. But when we look at adult men, we may wonder what happened to all these wonderful qualities. As adults, men display them to a far lesser degree, if at all. A lot of their best stuff has been trained out of them. In addition, some of their worst and most dangerous tendencies toward aggressiveness and even violence have been overdeveloped. Although I emphasize the role of learning or socialization in the discussion that follows, I do not mean to imply there are no biological differences between the sexes. There certainly are. Nature had different purposes in mind for males and females and programmed them accordingly. Nonetheless, the training given to boys and girls is strikingly different and has an important influence. While we may not be able to totally undo a genetic disposition, we can shape it to some extent. It is probably true, for instance, that males are genetically more aggressive than females. But how frequently and in what ways aggressiveness is manifested are significantly influenced by societal messages boys and men get about it. For the last 7 years, I've been involved in helping to raise a boy named Ian, who is now 8. He and his friends are nothing like any man I know. Expressing feelings? No problem. When I've hurt his feelings, Ian doesn't beat around the bush. Bernie, you hurt my feelings, and that isn't very nice. When we go into a room that contains strangers, he takes my hand and says, I'm scared. You know how shy I am. He has no trouble saying he's sad or apologizing when he has offended someone. He cries. He laughs. He smiles in a way that lights up the sky for everyone around. And he literally jumps for joy. Little boys present a huge problem for all societies because the societies don't want men to be like these boys. The question is how to make these open, expressive boys who wear their vulnerabilities and fears on their sleeves into strong, decisive performers who will be able to do whatever the society deems manly. We may think it's cute for a young boy to say, trembling, I'm scared a monster is gonna get me. But we don't want a 20 or 30-year-old to act that way. Instead, we want him to deny his fear. Monsters don't scare me. And announce he's going to kick some monster ass. Training in masculinity begins as soon as the child is born and continues for the rest of his life. By the age of 6 or 7, important lessons have already taken hold. An image of this process comes from a scene in a recent novel about a shooting at an elementary school. There was the usual mass confusion, shots, and a dead body being carried out. In short, a trauma. How did the kids react? A little girl burst into tears. A chubby boy, 5 or 6, cried. The boy next to him was older, maybe 8. staring straight ahead and biting his lips, straining for macho. Between the ages of 5 and 8, he has learned lessons about being male. He will not cry, maybe never again. Nor will he show fear or dependency or tenderness, and he may not even be able to ask for directions when he's lost. He will lose his ability not only to show feelings, but also to express and know them. He won't understand why his girlfriend or wife just wants to cuddle, to hear his fears and express hers, simply to talk. You can see the results of men's training everywhere, and such examples serve to reinforce the training for all men who observe. One football highlights TV show I saw in the fall of 1990 focused on New York Giants coach Bill Parcells, who coached his team that Sunday despite suffering from painful kidney stones. The very fact of working while in great pain itself conveys a powerful message regarding what a man is. As Parcells talked to reporters after the game, his discomfort was obvious. A reporter yelled out, "How do you feel, Bill?" Since it was apparent how he felt, all that was required was that he give a few words to his pain. But his response was this: "I'm going into the hospital tomorrow morning, and I'll probably be there a day or two." Feelings? What's that? The message that men watching the show will take away is as clear as the pain that Parcells felt but couldn't put into words. An important ingredient of the socialization of boys is the message, "Don't be like a girl." Since females of all ages are the softer ones, the people who express feelings, who cry, who are more people-oriented, not being like them is an effective way to suppress the softer side of males. Girls and women are allowed far greater leeway. Tomboy has nowhere near the derogatory punch of girl or sissy. Girls can play boys' games and with boys' toys, wear boys' clothes, but can you imagine what others will call a boy after the age of 4 or 5 who wears a dress or plays house or with dolls? And I'm going to stop here with today's story time. Very interesting, isn't it? This book was written a few decades ago, so I do feel like society is changing, no doubt. But I still think those old traditional ways of gender identity and socialization still exist. Especially in certain cultures. Wow. Hey, if you like what I'm doing here, donate to my Cash App, like and subscribe. Catch me in the next video, and may you find lasting happiness.